Okay, let's unpack this. You've handed us a stack of sources here.
Yeah.
Mostly commentary, some reports, focusing on some pretty significant moves by the Brazilian government recently.
That's right. We're looking at social media regulation and tax policy specifically.
Right. And the goal for this deep dive is basically to sift through this material and pull out the key insights, what these sources are actually telling us.
Exactly. And it's worth noting, these sources offer a very particular viewpoint. A lot of it centers on commentary from Ricardo Dias of Commentator, plus some clips and reports he refers to.
Got it. So it's his take, primarily, that we're examining through these materials.
Largely, yes. And these actions, well, they're kicking up a huge amount of dust in Brazil. Intense debate.
Makes sense. Potential impacts on, digital freedom, the economy. Seems pretty major.
Definitely. So let's guide you through what these specific sources are highlighting about these crossroads.
All right, let's dive in. First big area the sources cover. This digital crossroads situation starts with Brazil's Supreme Court, the STF.
That's the one. The material highlights a recent judgment where the source says the STF has formed a majority.
Okay, a majority for what?
To significantly increase the responsibility of social media platforms, the big tech companies, for the stuff users post.
And the sources mention this might mean changing a key internet law, the Marco Civil.
Yeah, potentially deeming parts of the 2014 Marco Civil de Internet unconstitutional. The idea, as the source presents it, is to make platforms more liable if users post, illegal content.
Okay, so expanding liability. And how's this going down, according to the sources, particularly with this commentator Dias?
Well, the reaction captured in the source material is incredibly strong. Dias reportedly views this decision as a very sad day for all Brazilians.
Wow, okay. Strong language. Does the source elaborate on why he's so critical?
Oh, yeah. He doesn't mince words, according to the source. He reportedly says many who back the STF decision don't understand anything, even questions their IQ to grasp what this truly means.
Oof. That's blunt, as presented in the source, of course.
Absolutely. And his core prediction, laid out in the material, is pretty stark. He thinks platforms might just pack up and leave Brazil because of these new burdens.
Really? Leave entirely?
That's what he predicts in the source. He argues it would hit millions who make a living online, plus, everyday users losing spaces for fun or just expressing themselves.
And the source says he accuses the STF of acting like a
dictatorial regime, claims they don't care about the people. And he alleges, again, according to the source, that the real goal here is political.
Political how?
Censorship, specifically aimed at the right wing. That's the motive he assigns to it in the source material.
Okay. Does the source offer specific things Dias points to back that claim?
It does. For example, it highlights a clip, included in the source, of Minister Luis Roberto Barroso talking about the platform's burden of removal relating to election debates.
And what's significant about that?
Well, the source emphasizes that Barroso reportedly used the actual word censorship, a censura, when discussing how platforms might evaluate content. Dias, in the source, sees this as revealing the true intent.
Right, suggesting it wasn't accidental. What else?
The source also mentions Minister Guilherme Mendes. According to the report, Mendes spoke about admiring the Chinese regime of Xi Jinping and used some kind of analogy about catching the mouse.
And Dias interprets that
as a reference to targeting people on the right specifically. That's the interpretation presented in the source.
Interesting. And there's also criticism about understanding the tech itself, something about Minister Alexandre de Moraes.
Yeah, Dias reportedly takes issue with a comment attributed to Moraes in the source, something about likes being monetized.
Which Dias disputes.
Strongly in the source. He argues it shows a basic misunderstanding. Platforms make money from ads and data, not selling likes. He sees it as evidence they don't get how it works.
And the source also mentions Dias arguing that certain tragic events are being used as a kind of excuse.
Exactly. Things like dangerous online challenges or, sadly, school attacks. Dias's argument, presented in the source, is that these are being used as a pretext for broader control, that they aren't the real reason for these regulatory moves.
So putting it all together, Dias's outlook for platforms in Brazil, based on this source, is pretty grim.
Very grim. The source conveys his expectation of just a wave of fines, lawsuits, making it eventually impossible, or at least unsustainable, for them to operate there. So they'll leave.
And the source mentions he feels this personally, too, as someone who creates content online.
Deeply. He reportedly feels years of his own work are under threat.
Yeah.
The source even includes this sarcastic bit where he wonders if he should just switch to making videos about cooking or sneakers.
But even that.
Right. Even that depends on the platforms actually sticking around, which he doubts, according to the source.
And he fears it could get worse.
The source says he worries about a more severe clampdown, maybe after the next elections.
So the final warning from Dias in this section of the source is quite alarming. Extremely stark, yeah. He basically says, in the source, that the public might only wake up when it's too late, when they suddenly can't post things or their favorite channels disappear. Then he says it will be too late.
Wow. Okay. That definitely paints one side of the digital regulation debate very clearly based on this source material. Highlights those big tensions.
For sure. Regulation versus free expression, control versus access. It's all there in this perspective.
Absolutely. Right. Let's shift gears then. The source material also dives deep into another major area, Brazilian tax policy.
And interestingly, it's the same main commentator again, Ricardo Dias, providing the critique here.
Okay. And what kicks this off in the source?
The source material uses a comment reportedly made by a journalist, Miriam Leitão, something like, "Not every tax increase is bad."
So that's the jumping off point for Dias.
Exactly. He apparently uses that to launch into a really strong critique of the Finance Minister, Fernando Haddad, and the Lula government generally.
Criticizing what specifically? What he sees, according to the source, as just constant tax hikes, a relentless push for more revenue through taxes.
And does the source mention how the government justifies these increases?
Yes, it quotes Haddad reportedly saying things like, the taxes only target the rich, the penthouse dwellers, or that they're somehow structural and fair.
Which Dias refutes.
Vehemently, according to the source. He calls it a lie. His argument, presented in the material, is that these taxes hit everybody, not just the wealthy elite.
Does he give examples in the source? Taxes he claims affect ordinary people.
He does. The source mentioned taxes on things called LCI and LCA. Those are specific investment types linked to farming and real estate. Also taxes on financial market stuff and betting.
Okay, LCI and LCA. How does he argue those taxes hurt regular folks, according to the source?
His reasoning, as laid out in the source, is that taxing these will hurt those sectors, agribusiness, real estate, make investment less appealing.
Which leads to?
Higher costs for agribusiness, he argues in the source. And if farming costs go up, he claims, food prices go up for everyone at the checkout.
I see the connection he's drawing there in the source. And the frequency of these tax changes, the source mentions a specific claim.
Yeah, Dias highlights a report, supposedly from Brazil Paralelo, mentioned in the source. It claimed 24 tax increases or even new taxes created since the start of 2023.
Wow, 24.
Which averages out, the source notes Dias calculating, to like 1 every 37 days or so.
That sounds frequent, if accurate, according to that report Dias cites. How does Dias feel the public is reacting to all this, based on the source?
Frustrated.
Yeah.
Deeply frustrated, according to the source. He expresses disbelief, even outrage, at what he sees as public apathy. Like, why isn't there more revolt? He feels people are just kind of accepting it.
And the source material includes actual confrontations, like in Congress.
Yes, there are clips included showing opposition deputies' names like Nicolas Ferreira, Carlos Jordi, are mentioned in the source challenging Minister Haddad directly.
Challenging him on his policies.
On the policies and even his qualifications, according to the source.
And how did Haddad respond, based on the source?
The source reports Haddad dismissed their challenges as childishness, using the word molekagem.
Okay.
And the response to that.
Deputy Jordi reportedly shot back, calling Haddad himself Molek, which implies, being childish or maybe inexperienced. Jordi apparently questioned him taking the minister job with what Jordi considered limited economic background.
Sounds intense.
Very. The source says the whole thing got really heated and they actually had to shut down the session. It really shows the temperature of the debate, as captured in the source.
Yeah, clearly. And Dias uses sarcasm throughout this part, too.
Oh, yeah, the source notes his biting sarcasm. Like, there's a bit mentioned where he sarcastically suggests maybe they should just tax bicycles next, anything to get more money. It underscores his view of their approach.
Right. So if you boil it down, what's Dias's overall message on tax policy coming through these sources? His core message, presented in the source material, is that the government's fiscal strategy is fundamentally deceptive and damaging. He argues it hurts ordinary Brazilians the most. And it's based on a flawed idea of who actually pays the price for these taxes.
And he wants people to
wake up. That's the call to action conveyed in the source. Wake up to what he sees as the harsh reality of the situation.
So looking back at both parts of this deep dive, the digital side and the tax side. It's clear these sources present a perspective deeply critical of current government actions in Brazil.
Definitely. Intense criticism on both fronts, focusing on the potential negative consequences as seen by this commentator.
And these are obviously complex issues with very real potential impacts for people living in Brazil or even those interacting with Brazil online or economically.
Absolutely. We're talking about how you might get your news, how you express yourself, but also, the cost of food, the attractiveness of investment, basic economic realities.
Right. So having explored the arguments and the criticisms laid out in these specific sources, maybe something for you, the listener, to think about is this. How is that fundamental balance, the one between government oversight or control and individual freedoms, both online and economically? How is that being negotiated or fought over right now? And based on the perspective we've examined today from these sources, who ultimately ends up carrying the weight when these big policy shifts happen? Just some food for thought.